Hi, everybody. My name is Amelia Vaughn. I'm so excited to be presenting to you today. And thank you for being here. We're excited to have such a great turnout, and we're really excited to show you the data and initial findings from our 14-state Cradle to Career Fiscal Map cohort. And we have a packed agenda with lots to get through. We do not have a formal question answer built in, but please use the Q&A function. And Elizabeth, myself, our team will stay on for about 15 minutes after the hour to answer any questions after the presentation. We're excited to present to you what we've been working on and talking about for the last 18 or so months. Data and initial findings from our state child and youth fiscal map cohort and the national analysis that was created from it. We'll also hear from some of our cohort participants and provide some ideas and opportunities for how states can act. And then finally, we'll discuss our ideas and our plans for sustaining and growing this fiscal database and infrastructure across the country. So I have a number of colleagues joining me today, but first let me introduce my boss, our CEO, Elizabeth Gaines, to share her origin story with fiscal mapping and the journey it has taken her to create our organization.
Thanks, Amelia, and so proud of the work that this team has done. It seems like a strange thing to get emotional about, but the more I think about it, and I think about, the trajectory of my career over the last, quarter century, really, and how money has been at the center of so many of the challenges we face as a field that care about children and youth. In fact, back in my days in Missouri in the state legislature and trying to lobby them for, increased spending on child and youth development, I was asked, well, what are we currently spending on child and youth development in the state? And no one knew the answer to that question. And so I got it kind of stuck in my craw, and I went and, tried to figure it out and did, what I think was a pretty early fiscal map, and probably not even nearly as sophisticated as the ones that Amelia has put together here. But I wanted to understand, what are we investing in our kids, and to what end? And so this is really the culmination of, for me, a long journey of my career to say, we need to have a better handle on what it is we're doing to invest in kids across a whole host of different departments and all the different outcomes that we want to see for young people. So, and it's not enough to sort of stop there. So organizationally, we are really building what I think is important fiscal data infrastructure for the field so that we can generate new revenue to fill any gaps that we're identifying. And so that's really what the vision of Children's Funding Project is to make sure that there are people in every single community who are waking up every day thinking about, are we doing everything we can to align the funding we have, to grow the funding we have, and to make sure we're really investing in young people. So, I spend a lot of time on our team talking about what gets budgeted gets done. And this is the beginning of that process, right? We have to know. So I'm really excited to have this data released to everyone today. And yeah, Amelia, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. And so a little bit about the why for this project. So why did we feel the need to document public investments in kids right now? In spring of 2022, when we started the cohort, we felt this sense of urgency to document public investments. Our children, youth, and families are going through a lot, and these are just a few of the headlines that have been standing out to me and have been keeping me up at night. There are a lot of pressing challenges that need to be addressed, but this also brings about a lot of opportunity for how states and local governments can respond. And so all this to say, this data we're sharing today is needed to understand what the current funding picture is, so then informed decisions can be made to improve it. And with that in mind, beginning in 2022, we set out to standardize how public funding for services and programs for kids is tracked and documented and then visualized through the state child and youth fiscal map cohort. In the first round of data collection, we worked with these 14 state partners to create fiscal maps of the state, federal, and federal relief funds invested in ages 0 to 24 for fiscal years 19 through 21. And apart from making the data comparable across the country, another main goal was to make it publicly available for state leaders, policymakers, advocates, and public employees to use to enhance their decision-making and further strategic public financing for children and youth. So each of these 14 states you see here will have an individual state fiscal map report. And we look at the data across various levels of detail. So you'll see that those maps are really chocked full of information. And this first round of mapping has truly been a pilot year. We've never taken on mapping so many states at one time, let alone under the same guidelines and using the same research process. So we have accomplished a lot and we have learned a lot. And we hope to just keep learning and improving as we go forward. And none of this would have been made possible without the help of many people. So here you see faces from the Children's Funding Project team. I'm so grateful to call these people my teammates, my colleagues. And then also our fiscal mapping data partner with the Community Innovation and Action Center housed at the University of Missouri St. Louis. A big thank you and shout out to everyone who has learned how to fiscal map and then has worked on this project, because we collected and we cleaned a lot of data. So it was fun. We did a good job. And that's a little bit about us. And so now we're going to have a poll to learn about who's in our audience today. And with the answers, we hope to provide some helpful information to you, and then also moving forward as we continue to explore and use the data. So the first question asks who you are, who you represent, and then the second question, what you'd like to learn from today. Awesome. Great, so we really do have a good range, a lot of state government agencies, which makes sense, and advocacy organizations, but really excited to see some local representation as well, because this data will be applicable to you as well. National organizations, foundations, and the interested individual. Wonderful. And I love that the majority of the answers is how to use the data to achieve goals for kids, because that's our main goal as well. So thank you so much for answering that. And without further ado, let's see a fiscal map. So I'm really happy to introduce my colleague at the Community Innovation and Action Center, Wyatt Hummerkaus. He's a data and research associate. And he will be walking through the fiscal map for South Carolina that he took the lead in creating. So Wyatt, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Amelia, so much for that introduction. And thank you all for your time today. It has been a true pleasure to work with all of our state leads across the country. I had the pleasure of working with our state lead in South Carolina. And so today I'm happy to present to you what our final product looks like. And so based off of our introduction, we were listening to questions that we were hoping this process could begin to answer. Questions like who invests, how much, and in what? And so what you're looking at here is the fiscal map summary page. It's the landing page on each state's fiscal map. And what you can see here is the answer to some of those questions. Who is funding? The federal, state government, federal relief funds here with COVID-19 packages. Being that 2021 was one of our fiscal years, we have incorporated that data as well. And so we're looking at who invests, how much, and in what. We have coded the data and the funding streams all the way to their end at the outcome category, and begun to wrap our minds around what these funds are being used for. One of the very neat things about Power BI and the fiscal maps in general is that this entire page is interactive. And so you can click into the visuals and begin to see things around the page change. You can see how much of the federal funding for each fiscal year went to the specific outcome categories. Additionally, your funding stream inventory here adjusts to reflect what you've selected as well. And we can see that those year-to-year totals also change when we interact with the visuals. Now, I could spend a lot of time on each page, but I'm going to go ahead and try to keep it quick today. We're going to move into the services, age, and eligibility pages. These next pages are extremely helpful and function well for those who work with a specific age group or within a certain sector or service category. The way that the data is visualized here, it allows for you to drill down into the data to see which funding streams can be leveraged to continue and support your work. And so if we select all of the eligible services here that the funding streams have been coded to, we'll see our total numbers here for each fiscal year. Now, as child and education advocates, we do understand that within this data scope, we do have K through 12 funding. We also have higher ed funding. And so with these checkboxes, we can take a look at what those figures look like without those large ticket items inflating the figures. Additionally, we can see here that these are our funding streams that go to support services that occur outside of higher ed and K through 12. So an additional way to leverage using this page is, say, for instance, you are an early childhood advocate and you want to take a look within that service sector, what is being funded and how it compares. You can select the specific eligible services that you would like to see. Again, we have a response from our page here, and you can compare side by side with these bar charts what is being funded. Early childhood education slots, funding streams that go to ensure quality within early childhood education, and intervention services. And so you can begin to make sense of what the funding landscape looks like for these different eligible services within your state. So moving on to our eligibility page, similar to the services page, this page is just another way to increase understanding around what the funding is for. So if you're interested in learning which of the funding streams go to special populations, you would be able to see that information here. Aside from helping advocates increase their overall understanding of the populations that are reached by each funding stream, this also helps advocates coordinate between federal and state efforts and help states identify which populations they may not be reaching as well. Moving here to our age range page, we can begin to make sense of how funding breaks down between the age ranges 0 to 24 and the groups that we've coded the data for. One quick thing to note about this page, these are totals as a distinct count of funding stream. And so this is not necessarily representative of the dollar or fiscal amount, but rather which of the funding streams, how many of them go to each one of these age ranges. Additionally, we have provided a pie chart here, and this is population demographic data, and we've pulled this in order to have a little bit of an understanding of how many funding streams might be appropriate for each age group. Additionally, kind of going back to our uses of the map for early childhood education, say you support or you work for an organization that supports early childhood education. And so you have birth to 2 and 3 to 4. You can take a look at what the proportion of funding looks like for each one of those age ranges. And so one thing to kind of tie all three of those pages together, they are excellent tools that we have created to be leveraged to begin to spur discussions and research surrounding where funding goes. So moving forward through the rest of our map, we have a page for each fiscal year that was within our parameter and scope. And so the yearly pages, they all look the same. They are very helpful in answering those who, how much, and in what questions. We have level of intervention visualized, outcome category, and an inventory of funding streams here. So this just helps states begin to see year-to-year progress or disparities that they might be seeking to address. And as you'll see, 19 to 20, not much of a change, but because of the COVID pandemic and the relief packages, 2021 does look quite different. Additionally, in each one of these pages, we've pulled from Kids Count data system a sort of indicator space. And so, you know, as child advocates, we know that we can't make a direct link between funding and specific child and youth indicators. However, these indicators are, though, very helpful for folks who may be unaware of the specific state's context and what that looks like. So because of the COVID pandemic funding, we did pull out a federal relief funding page with eligible services and programs and totals. And so this page is helpful for a lot of reasons. This page helps us to report and understand which services and programs the federal relief funding actually went to support. And then additionally, this helps us identify service sectors that will inevitably see gaps when that funding is no longer around. And so it allows for advocates and service providers to start those conversations about what sustainable funding looks like moving forward, and they can start to formulate those plans. You'll see it is the case with most of the states. K through 12 funding, as well as higher ed. Those were some of the larger service and programs that we did see that funding go to. And then here we have a state budget comparison page, and this is an internal look at state spending and what is being spent on children and youth within South Carolina. And so we have on this page an age demographic pie chart. This shows you a rough proportionality of how much of the population is within that 0 to 24 age range. And then mirrored in these visualizations, you also see the proportion of state funding that went to children and youth for each of the fiscal years. Here we have per capita spending per child for each fiscal year. And so what you can begin to see here is just a little bit of how the percentage of funding breaks down for the population. One interesting thing that I did want to highlight, we previously discussed the large buckets of K through 12 funding that make some of these figures look a little different. Here we have an examination of 2021 state revenue spending without that large bucket of K through 12 public education funding. And so when we see exactly how much is left for services aside for K through 12 public education, we can get a little bit better of an indicator at what can be used for services. And then finally, here is the methodology page. This is going to be one of your best friends as you're utilizing this resource. This will help you to answer questions like, how did we come up with that number? And how is South Carolina's map a little bit different from another state in the cohort? But all of those specific granular questions are there. And you can find those answers on the methodology page. But
and Wyatt, I might just add to on that page there, you know, we had to make some choices as an organization and how to do this the first time out of the gate as a pilot, working with multiple states at once. And so, you know, we're really aware of the fact that we're in pilot mode. And so there could be many, many ways of doing this. We've always said it's more like an art than a science. And in a lot of ways, we're trying to get to like the paint by numbers kind of art instead of just like finger painting. But I think we're still, you know, on a journey to figure out the best ways to convey this information to the field.
Absolutely. Definitely a journey. Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you today. And Amelia, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Wyatt. Great job. And I appreciate you and your hard work on this. So thank you so, so much. And now let me introduce two cohort participants from other states. Joe DiCostanzo, the Vice President of Education for the Nebraska Children and Families Foundation. He will talk first about Nebraska's fiscal mapping experience and future plans for using the data. And then Stephanie Hoganson, Policy Director for the Governor's Children's Cabinet in Minnesota. She will discuss fiscal mapping as a part of a bigger picture for children's funding. So Joe, just let me know when you'd like me to advance your slides.
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. You can go ahead and advance to the first one. First, thank you to the Children's Funding Project, to our partners at the Department of Education and Health and Human Services for helping us put this map together. It's really been a great experience. We, much like Elizabeth, are trying to say, what do we spend? Where do we spend under a common language 25 years ago? So we're here now. And so thanks for helping us move this effort forward. It's a really ambitious project. And so your guys' partnership has really been tremendous. Your staff has really been accessible, flexible, and wonderful thought partnerships around what other states are doing, how they're utilizing it, while really being attentive to what makes sense for Nebraska and what makes sense for our localized communities. So you guys made a very difficult task easier. And just like you guys are saying, with this pilot, we're really excited about this first map and sharing it. And we're also really thoughtful about how we can utilize it in different ways and improve it as folks on the ground get a chance to interact with it and give us some options for improvement. Our public agency partners were really great in terms of getting us the data. Your staff has been awesome in helping us think through what do we need, how do we need it. I always think about how do we make the lives of our state partners easier in facilitating this process. So year on year, it is able to sort of live on and be used for its intended purpose. Sort of ease of use and ease of gain of access to the data is really a big part of our thinking about the sustainability of the work. I know you guys put in a lot of time and effort to helping us create this map, and we want it to continue. So what does this look like for Nebraska is still a remaining question. We hope to continue to fund it as people use it and utilize it to help support youth and families. The need will be obvious, but yet the time and the effort and dollars to support the work, where is that coming from? How can we make this a really usable, long-lasting process for us? So next slide on how we're thinking about using this map next is really to contextualize the numbers. As mentioned earlier, there's this looming fiscal cliff. It's going to look different in different states, but what does the dollars that won't be there next year mean in terms of services for kids? So we're hoping to say, making this number up, of course, we're going to have $1 million less dollars for after school. Well, how many slots is that? How many kids is that going to impact across the state? Big numbers are sometimes easy to get lost in a spreadsheet, but knowing how many kids and families it's going to impact, we hope can help make a case for utilizing and thinking about budgets and dollars in a way that is really meaningful. Again, we and you guys did a great job. This isn't a tool for comparison. Of course, Nebraska likes to be in the top 10 and near number 1, but what does it really mean across states as each state is different? As each local context is unique, how can we really use it as a reflection tool on how are we best investing in our kids? And speaking with our policymakers on a common language that this provides will also be helpful. We also hope to get this into the hands of our 22 community collaboratives, which are collective impact organizations Nebraska Children supports throughout the state. They're the real change makers. They'll tell us how to make this better. And so we're really excited to continue to work with our community collaboratives, hopefully with this new tool using a map, and then improve it year after year after year. So thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate your guys' partnership throughout this entire effort and looking forward to exciting things to come.
Ashley really enjoyed that process as well. So now on to Stephanie.
Thanks, Amelia. And now I wish I had a slide on the support that Children's Funded Project has provided us over the years to get to where we are. But I will just second everything that has been said and reiterate that this kind of what Elizabeth said at the beginning, that as someone who's worked in child and family advocacy for a long time, fiscal mapping is one piece and a big piece of how we land at where we want to be with an equitable world for our children and families. So on the next slide, I just want to really quickly acknowledge the tie to our children's cabinet in Minnesota and how our governance structure allows us to align people, data, money, and policy around children and families. Our governor, Tim Walz, and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan have built a robust children's cabinet with this goal to align people, data, money, and policy around children and families. And that I really think children's cabinets and fiscal maps go hand in hand and provide an opportunity together to better use our resources to serve children and families. And I'm going to skip my talking points on about how CFP was so helpful in the process, but I'm going to just acknowledge one thing. They also connected me to a lot of states who've done this work for a long time, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel to land the plane. We begged, borrowed, and stole art projects from other states to go with the metaphor of it's an art and not a science. And I'm really grateful to a lot of those states that are here today. So on the next slide, I'm just going to talk really quickly about how we institutionalized our map. We launched our map in December 2021, and right, we were planning for a long time, and then COVID hit, but we were able to keep it going because we got the leadership buy-in that we need. We used our children's cabinet structure. Our cabinet is comprised of 21 agency commissioners, and the governor and lieutenant governor co-chair the cabinet. We really utilize that structure to tell them what a fiscal map is and get the buy-in on what we could do in Minnesota. And thankfully, our budget division, which is housed in management and budget, where our children's cabinet also sits, our administration, so where I work, also bought into our vision and really supported us to be able to do that, so that we were able to institutionalize it in our budget systems. One of our next steps that Amelia and Elizabeth and Children's Funding Project helped us design was we really had to build the process to develop a map and document that process. And so we created an instruction manual, a glossary, and a process for tracking decisions in scope. And like Elizabeth said, it is an art and not a science, and you just kind of have to acknowledge that and get it right as best you can, and use the data where the data works to be used, and dig in more where you need to dig in more. And a couple notes on just to developing those materials that we learned, again, through, I think Elizabeth suggested to us, maybe you should sit down with all your agency fiscal leaders. And we did that early. And we tried to engage our external partners in the process too, and just continually seek feedback from them as well. The way we are able to update our map and keep it going, and the link is in here if you ever want to play around with it or talk to me about it, please reach out. We have our state budget system, and we tag and track all of our resources in our budget system, if they are in scope of the fiscal map, by our outcome goals and service models. And so that allows us to extract the data and update it biannually, because in Minnesota, we operate on biannual budgets. And then we just continue to share and provide the map ongoing. And on the next slide, I'll say a little bit about ways it's been used. This is just a highlight. And even today I was at a meeting, and someone asked about how we could use the fiscal map to do a deeper dive into child welfare funding. But this past legislative session, Minnesota invested a very large budget surplus into children and families programs and services. And one calculation of that investment is around $16 billion. And that you can see a summary here. We also are in the process of a governance shift. We created a new department. We're creating a new Department of Children, Youth, and Families that will be established on July 1st, 2024. And the fiscal map helped us at least start the conversation around the fiscal components that would move to the new agency. Lots of conversations have to come later after that. We reviewed the map to identify flexible COVID funding. We're doing an expanded analysis on early childhood expenditures to understand where there's opportunities for coordination and alignment, continue to understand. We've done many efforts around that in the state. And then we also use the map as a starting point to say, where are we spending money on our young people, our youth, and identify the programs that should sit at a table to help support their a cross-agency table that we convene to help so think about how to better coordinate services for youth in our state. So it's fiscal maps are not gonna, I wish it was as quick and easy as a tableau like this, even though it's not always easy to fix all of our funding and concerns for children, youth, and families, but it really is a starting point for a lot of conversations that can move the needle. So thank you for this great work and the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing in Minnesota.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Joe. And just so everyone knows, like, well, why is Minnesota, they have a map, what are they doing in this cohort? Stephanie graciously shared her data with us so we could put it into our database. So just as a side note there, so they do have their own fiscal map report and they will keep that going. Like Stephanie said, it's institutionalized, it's living. And then their data is also within our methodology. And so if you guys haven't gathered yet, documenting the funding for children and youth has felt a little like we're painstakingly peeling back the layers of an onion. And it all starts with this federal funding catalog that my co-director of the research capacity team, Alicia Wilson-Alstrom, led the creation of. And this federal database has been the starting point for data collection in each state map, minus the ones like Stephanie's that we acquired data from. So Alicia, welcome.
Thank you, Amelia. So again, we created a federal funding catalog mapping more than 280 federal funding streams and counting for the investments of children and youth ages 0 to 24. States can think of this as a companion resource, providing a database of federal investments, same structure, same focus on development, same terms and indicators as part of a searchable tool for states to get started. For states that do not have these comprehensive maps, this listing and categorization of the federal investments provides an initial starting place to map the federal funds that are available across the 0 to 24 public enterprise at the federal level of investments. In early 2024, we'll be giving another boost to states' capacity and ability to look and sort and across the federal funding catalog as we add in state drop downs of the federal obligations from year to year across each of these funding streams. You can go to the next slide. This is an example of a zoom in. So you can zoom into any one stream to, again, get a summary of info for each of the funding streams in the database. And so this is just a still shot of being able to zoom in and kind of get, again, those categories and information and be able to, again, think about where they fit into an overall kind of search and ultimately a map of children's funding streams in your states. Again, we really see the federal resource and the state resources as a game-changing opportunity for states to get their collective arms around the funding picture that's very often siloed, fragmented, and complex. So we are delighted to be offering up these resources and we'll continue to update these and continue to grow and expand them in the future.
And so we took the data from this federal funding tool and then added the additional layers to it. So we then added state level investments and added federal relief investments. And so just so you have a little bit idea of our process. Okay, and to switch gears a little bit, or at least another version of our analysis, after we created the very detailed individual state reports, we tried our best to aggregate that data and decipher what national trends are emerging. We really see this as a start in how to interpret this data, and know there is a lot more research that can be done about this, what this all means. Also, we hope to add more states over time, really hope to add more states over time. So I think that'll make these trends more visual and robust. So this is our national analysis. I'm sharing the report on slides just because I'm also sharing slides, but it is a Power BI report as well. And there are 4 pages to the report. The first 2 I see is really showing how states differ, both in population size and in budget, and also how they use their state funds for kids. And then the second 2 pages start to show those national trends and how the country focuses on investing state dollars. The data table in the upper right-hand corner provides contextual information about how the states in the cohort differ, both in size and budget size and other demographics. And then also the last column is hyperlinks to each of the individual state maps. The bar chart on the left shows the proportion of funding from state funds, federal funds, and federal relief funds that supported children and youth in these 14 states in 2021. And from performing this analysis and talking it over, we've learned more about why the picture looks this way, other than the sheer size of the state. And the few reasons we've gathered so far in how state spending differs could be because if the state has dedicated funding or has utilized certain streams in a different way. Or something that this map doesn't take into account is how some states have a higher amount of county administered funds, like in New York, for example, child welfare funds, or for locally administered education dollars as well. The second page of the analysis shows the amount states spent on children and youth as a percent of their full state budget or full state revenue. And the per capita investment states spent on ages 0 to 24 without K-12 public education. Both of these have pulled that K-12 public education line item out. And this is because at Children's Funding Project, we've always focused on encouraging states and localities to more sustainably fund the services and supports that happen outside of the classroom. Not that we don't care about education funding, but that big ticket dollar amount is set by a formula, and there are various laws about that state and local share, like I just mentioned. And if we really want to make sure our kids are taken care of when they're not in the classroom too. In the actual link, you can click on any of these dots and see the exact percentage or per capita amount. Or you could click on one of the state names and their corresponding data will appear. And so you see for the, we're ranging in about a 4 to 27% of a state budget invested in kids, not including K-12, and only a few $100 to about $3,700 invested in kids ages 0 to 24 without K-12. This third page, we would all love to understand what outcomes come from our investments. And this is a first step in understanding. We have to first know what the streams are and their intention to support these outcomes. And so this analysis shows the percent of state funds, again, so just focusing on state funds in these pages, I want to make that clear. Percent of state funds invested in supporting youth on their development to be educated, healthy, connected and supported to their families and community, safe and employed. And please note how the percentages change and the scale between the different categories. I will say that the next 2 pages do include K-12 and higher ed dollars. So that's why you see such a higher proportion of state investments in that educated category. And then our last page of this national analysis shows what states are investing in as a portion of their state budget, again, broken down by level of intervention or the intended approach a funding stream or program has to support kids. And so very similar to the prior page, the level that includes education funding is the highest category of spending. So that's positive youth development and education. And then again, just noting you all to how that scale changes throughout the other levels. Basic services would be much higher if we did include Medicaid in our analysis and general housing, but we did not, just because we were not able to efficiently determine the amount of funds that go towards our population, and both those funding streams are so large, it would be an inflation to include the total amount. And also on the link, there is a definitions page. So I did see some questions in the chat about how we define these outcome categories, and hopefully if you go there, you can learn a little bit more. And that's a lot to unpack, but we certainly pledge to continue digging in and learning, and we hope you do too. So please be in touch with your thoughts and your findings as you look through the report.
Okay, so what does it all mean? Why do we care about this? I mean, I think folks can probably glean that there is so much unpacking to be done here. And I personally am just really excited that we are beginning the unpacking. If you're a researcher, if you're a policymaker, if you're a program provider, there's a whole bunch of different people out there who I think need to dig into this data and information and get that sort of big picture view on what's going on in their state, but also zoom in and understand specific funding streams for specific types of services, et cetera. So Amelia, talk a little bit about, why we thought having this publicly available piece was so important.
Well, so technically all budget documents are publicly available, but if you've ever looked at one, they're not the easiest to interpret unless you are a finance officer. And certainly for those states and localities that don't have a children's budget, they are not organized by any means in how much goes to kids. So we wanted to make that available and accessible, both make the data available and the visuals easy to digest for, again, further discussion and deeper research in hopes to inform decision making.
Okay, and every state is super unique and has their own context, but talk about the standardization of why we thought it was so important to standardize.
Yes, each state has been very unique, and we've learned a lot along the way. And we tried our best to standardize and uniform the data. But the main reason why we wanted to do that is because I think it's really important to build a movement of how we talk about funding for children and youth if we wish to move the needle on funding for children and youth. And like Minnesota, Tennessee, there are some other states that have children's budgets or fiscal maps, but none of them communicate with each other. They all use slightly different variables and have different data. And so there's no way to look across the states that have a current fiscal map and see national trends or see differences. And so we just think it's really important to start that movement. And
I will just say that part of the reason why now this seems so critically important for those of you who, like me, were around in 2008, 2009 in this work, we had another federal stimulus package, right? And states were sort of saved in that moment too by a big infusion of dollars by the federal government. We did not have a way of tracking at that time what happened after that, right? So we didn't have a sense really across the country what states were doing to invest in kids. We have a hunch that they were investing in kids in things like pre-K and childcare in ways that they aren't even today, right? So, but we were never able to sort of have the trend lines to point to say, and here's what happened, and here's what we need to get back to. So we felt like it was really, really important given this huge federal stimulus, that we be able to have a baseline from 2019 and carry that through into the years when those American Rescue Plan dollars are gone, so that we can make that solid case for investing in our young people. So that's another very important reason to be doing it right now. So I think, to that point, I hope that everyone out there is thinking about how do we prepare for the end of this federal stimulus, right? We know that it's going to have to absolutely take a concerted effort by Congress to put new money into important things like childcare, into youth mental health, into our schools, right? But we're also really encouraged by states and communities, not just sort of standing around waiting for Congress to act. I think it's become clear to us in all of our fiscal mapping that this is a group effort. It's got to take federal, state, local, private funding, all sort of playing their right role. And I'm very encouraged by things like private funders are stepping into the space to say, wait a minute, what can we as private funders be doing to really incentivize better public financing of these things, knowing that private funding is sometimes less than 5% of a total fiscal map in any given place. So I think there's a lot of really encouraging bright spots happening. And if you go to the next slide, one thing we don't include here are things like the child tax credits. That is something that has been a huge, huge advancement for ending poverty for children in many states. So states have been stepping up to say, we want to do something too. And that's very exciting. Those dollars don't show up in here because we're really tracking spending, and this is a credit, right? But really important to keep track of. And then there are states that have early, adopted this notion of we've got to secure new revenue and now is the time to do it. And so they've been, as you heard Stephanie say, in Minnesota, our friends in Vermont just had a big win this last legislative session. New Mexico, folks have heard a lot about, even states like Louisiana, where both state and local revenue is being generated in concert, so that it's like, we're going to hold hands and do this together. And it's really helping make a difference in important areas like early childhood. So keep going. If you're a state that is considering what you're going to do when this federal cliff comes, there are things to do. There's hope to generate some new revenue.
Sorry, I was letting my dog. That was a good time. I knew that would happen at least once. And so our work is certainly not done. We're really happy to get to this point to show our initial data with you all, but we're rolling along. So we've committed to continuing this works with waves of states. So one thing we'd like to do is help other states institutionalize the fiscal mapping process, like Stephanie was talking about in Minnesota, through legislation or data sharing agreements. And we've actually developed some template legislation that we would like to share and support. We'd like to help states in their efforts for further strategic public financing activities for children and youth. So conducting cost models and also potentially launching revenue generation efforts. We do that all in-house at CFP. And then we would like to help our cohort partners update the data either on an annual or biannual basis. And right now we are adding more states to the map. So this summer we started to work with Kansas and Utah with their data hopefully coming out early in the new year. And in the new year as well, we'll be starting to tackle California's budget, which I think will be fun. So I'm very excited to see how this map fills in over time. I think with another wave, we could have, almost half the country mapped. And of course, we will really pay attention to how we can improve our methodology over time, because I only care about the data being useful and being accurate for everybody here. So to keep the momentum going, if you are interested in learning about how to add your state's data, please fill out the survey that we're going to put in the chat and also send in follow-up. And we're going to review the submitted responses for consideration in the next wave of participation. And those who are best positioned to join, we'll invite to an information session in early December. So fill out the survey and we'll be in touch. Even if it's not for this wave, we would love to send you information and homework for how to be ready for future waves. So Elizabeth, any parting thoughts for the group?
Oh, so many parting thoughts, but I will not get into it because I do see a ton of questions coming through. And I think that it's a good thing for us to go in and really try to answer some of those. I will just say, you know, organizationally, our goal is to have this kind of what we're calling fiscal data infrastructure. We made that up in place in half the country. And we'd like to see that happen within the next 3 years. So I see a lot of interest in the chat about that. Please do, you know, fill out the survey if you think your state is in a position to be able to help us access some of this data, and we'll hopefully be able to get you in there and get you working with us. So yeah, I think, you know, that's my parting thought, and then we can turn to Q&A. Amelia, anything from you?
No, just thank you for joining us today, and thank you again for the team that has worked on this project. I've really enjoyed it. And for anybody who uses the data, has questions about it, I want to hear all of it because that means that people are looking at it. So please be in touch.
Great. Okay, so if we go to the top here, there was a question about interest in learning how to share or translate the data for state policymakers for their consideration as they craft and enact policy that supports children. I mean, honestly, I think, Amelia, that's one of our main priorities with this data, is to get it really in use in states so that better decision-making can happen for investments for kids. That was my initial impetus for doing this work back in Missouri, is to be able to prove, no, we're not spending enough on, you know, in my case, it was positive youth development. Instead, we're spending it on deep end intervention. I wanted to be able to tell that story. So each state's own story is going to be different, but I think using this data to craft some of those stories is really important. So maybe you can tackle this one about the distinction of positive youth development as compared to prevention or basic services. How might that fourth category of youth development versus just prevention, basic intervention benefit policymakers? Why we pulled that out?
That's a good question, and was a discussion of a lot of our methodological discussions before starting the cohort. So we think of positive youth development as the services and supports that really foster well-being from cradle to career. And in our definition, that includes education. Many cases can be made that education is prevention too. You know, it just provides or basic service. It's mushy. But for us, that development track, we really take into account the mind in that. So we've lumped education in there. And then that leaves prevention and intervention being really for those targeted named prevention and intervention efforts. So if it doesn't say that this program is to prevent X or to is for an effect of a cause, then we don't tag it as those two categories. And then basic services meet the basic needs. So healthcare, insurance, we do include CHIP, but just not Medicaid. Maybe in future years we'll tackle Medicaid. Nutrition support, energy assistance, maybe also will include housing at some point if we can really drill down what goes to children, youth, and families. And so I did put in the chat that I hope to release a larger memo about our methodology, but you can see kind of like an abbreviated version of that in each state fiscal map and in the national analysis.
Right. This next question, Wyatt, if you're still there, I'm going to ask you to answer in the Q&A. So if you could just type an answer to this question about South Carolina, that'd be great. There's a question about what's needed for states to be involved in this work. I think that the survey is a good place to start. And Amelia, maybe just give a flavor. I mean, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the different lead organizations in each state and sort of the pros and cons of where folks sit and how they can access budget holders. Do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. Yeah, so we had a diversity of the type of organization we partnered with as our state lead in each of the state, in government, out of government, intermediary, children's cabinet. And that was part of the pilot too, to really see if there was a trend in like one type of organization being the standout. There wasn't a cohesive trend in that regard, but what makes an organization very ready to begin a fiscal map is if you have contacts with budget holders in your state. So the data that we can gather, being an outside organization, is publicly available through budget documents and the federal funding tool. But it really, really helps to increase validity and increase detail if we can talk about that data that we collect with a budget holder who knows that Department of Education's budget inside and out, or Department of Health and Human Services budget inside and out. So that's really key in my mind. There's kind of like the department by department route of verification. But we've also worked with places that have contacts with legislative analysts that kind of know the budget as a whole. So can, again, look at it and just to make sure that what we're doing, again, as non-natives is correct.
There's a question in here, and I don't know what our answer is, but would you consider reporting on capital projects and facilities in the future and labeling it system building, especially during expansion efforts for early care and education, like playground building, renovation, subsidizing rent for childcare providers, things like that?
I think so. I think specifically in that early childhood use case, that would be really helpful. Another component that I would really like to add going forward, which we excluded and kind of lumped into facilities and capital investments, are all of the investments being made in getting internet accessible to kids and their families so they can do their homework or so they can apply to colleges or jobs. I think that is an important investment.
You're just thinking selfishly about that because you live in rural Virginia. Where you
I do. But it's important.
Yeah. We answered the question about California. If the folks who asked that didn't hear, we are starting work with California in January, and the partner there is Children Now. So reaching out to them if you have questions about getting involved. Our child nutrition programs funded through USDA in public schools included. What I don't know is whether they were asking if, yes, they're included, but whether they're asking if they were included in our pullout of education funding. I'm not sure.
Yes, so both. Answer is both. So all school nutrition programs are coded on that services page as nutrition assistance, and for the specific service, and then that would be coded as a basic service in that level of intervention for providing nutrition support. It's nutrition support, not nutrition service, nutrition support.
Great. Let's see, I answered this one in the chat. If CFP receives fiscal mapping requests from a number of organizations in the same state. Laura, if you're on and still listening, Laura's our project manager. I said that we would make explicit connections between multiple organizations in one state that had an interest so that you can, band together to work on this. It can be a group effort. We talked about what states are in the next cohort wave. That's California, Kansas, Utah. Do you have any examples on how nonprofits are using block grants or large funding programs in innovative and flexible ways for early care and education, or examples of blending and braiding of funding? You can think about, and maybe if Alicia's still on, she can talk about what we're seeing from a federal perspective, also from a federal stimulus perspective. If one of our ARPA tracking team members is on, you could share some examples, but we have lots of good examples of how folks have used flexible American Rescue Plan dollars in that regard. And those are on our website. Maybe someone on the team can put the ARPA examples tracker into the chat. I'm not sophisticated enough to be able to do that and talk at the same time. And then on the blending and braiding, Amelia, we didn't emphasize enough, I don't think, this notion that one of the things that this tool we hope will spark in states is people pulling up all the funding streams that, connect to counseling, right? And say, oh, wait, there's 4 different departments in our state that have some emphasis on counseling and some funding stream that's tied to that. Let's get together and think about how we roll those dollars out in our state. So I think there's lots of opportunity. We hear people talk about blending and braiding all the time. And in my view, you can't blend and braid until you've done what we're showing you here today, which is understand each of the funding streams, what their eligibility rules are, what their reporting rules are, how they are targeted, and then think about, are there ways to blend and braid those in more efficient ways to support kids? So I think this is like an important first step to blending and braiding in that way. I don't know if you want to add anything.
And just to add on to that, I think that's perfect. And then just how to use the maps in order to do that. So I really think, like Wyatt said, each page is a tool to learn what funding streams are available, and then get the right people at the table and discuss further and do more research. So I hope that is how you use the fiscal money.
Great. Answered that. Let's see. We will certainly email copies of the slides and the recording. It is a lot to digest. For the states that dedicate their own funding, do you all have reports on the outcomes of the additional funding to show positive outcomes of state funding dollars? So that gets into a whole nother layer of this onion that we think is so critically important. Being able to track whether the funding streams that we're looking at in these maps are actually achieving the outcomes that are intended is a whole nother research project that we are hoping becomes easier because of this data. So absolutely, in individual states, folks should make it their business to check and track that stuff, right? So please have your way with the data and start to figure that out. Let's see here. Do you see other questions, Amelia, that were?
I did see one question in the chat about New York's data being released. And so their data was in good enough shape to be added to the national report, though we're really working with talking about finding the right partner, trying to find the right home for the fiscal map to live indefinitely. And there is momentum to really sustain that work. So we wanted to hold back on releasing the individual report until the permanent state partner is identified, and then clean it up and then release it with a new wave.
Great. Good question. Amelia, can we send the survey? This person wants to know if they can send the survey to other organizations that might be better positioned to respond to it and work with us on fiscal mapping. Is there a way? I know we wanted people to attend this webinar, but if they viewed the webinar and then, so is it forwarding the webinar link and then be able to?
So I think easier than that, you can send the, so in follow-up to the webinar, we'll send our slides and the recording, and then also the survey as an independent link. So having you be here is their golden ticket to be able to apply, because if you really think that they do have the right partnerships and would be that perfect lead, then please invite them and we'll sift through responses.
Yeah, and then it looks like the last question is, I'm interested in trends in private funding in this space. Maybe it's outside of your scope, but it would be interesting to understand how this strategy is developing nationally. I will say this is something that I am hot on right now because I've been talking with a number of private funder collaboratives about how they as private funders can really engage in this strategic public financing, particularly given the ARPA cliff that's coming. And I don't know if a team member can put in the chat the local funder toolkit, but we worked through a ton of examples on how philanthropy is getting engaged in this. Part of the reason that sounds like a punt in terms of the answer to that question about where does private funding layer in on this, but every time we've done one of these, and like I said, I've been doing this almost 20 years. Alicia's been doing this almost that many years. Amelia, right behind us. Every time we've looked at the private funding in a given place, it's less than 5% of spending on kids is coming from private philanthropy. So the lion's share of the resources are the public dollars. We want private funders understanding how to impact that space and how to use their dollars for leverage. So maybe that's where we end. Amelia, do you have any last words? Anybody have any last words?
Gosh, I have a lot of thoughts about how this can go. I think one last thing that we haven't touched on in detail is if you represent a locality or live in a locality that is interested in using this state data for your analysis, please also reach out to us because having a state fiscal map is really the backbone to creating your own as a locality. So that is also another layer of the onion we'd like to add on. So federal, state, and local funding. So just thank you so much for being here, everybody.
And huge thank you to Amelia, to Wyatt, to Kiley, to, oh gosh, now I'm starting to name people and I can't name everyone. I'm just looking at who I see on the screen here, but Aaliyah, the whole team for all of the work that you've done. It's really a huge lift and is a huge contribution to our field. So appreciate you so much.
Pleasure. Have a good rest of the week, everybody.